Hello everyone! I hope you're ready for another adventure, because today Wayne continues to read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Always remember that as you go through these amazing adventures and read these outstanding stories, all you have to do is press the CC button in your YouTube link in order to follow along with the words. I think that the perfect person to join me for today's adventure is North Star. Now that North Star is here, let's jump in. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 9, The Writing on the Wall. What's going on here? What's going on? Attracted no doubt by Malfoy's shouts, Argus Filch came shouldering his way through the crowd. Then he saw Mrs. Norris and fell back, clutching his face in horror. My cat! My cat! What's happened to Mrs. Norris? He shrieked, and his popping eyes fell on Harry. You, he screeched. You're the one who murdered my cat. You've killed her. I'll kill you. Argus. Dumbledore had arrived on the scene, followed by a number of other teachers. In seconds, he had swept past Harry, Ron, and Hermione and detached Mrs. Norris from the torch bracket. Come with me, Argus, he said to Filch. You too, Potter, Mr. Weasley and Miss Granger. Lockhart stepped forward eagerly. My office is nearest, Headmaster, just upstairs. Please feel free. Thank you, Gilderoy, said Dumbledore. The silent crowd parted to let them pass. Lockhart, looking excited and important, hurried after Dumbledore, so did Professors McGonagall and Snape. As they entered Lockhart's darkened office, there was a flurry of movement across the walls. Harry saw several of the Lockharts in the pictures dodging out of sight, their hair in rollers. The real Lockhart lit the candles on his desk and stood back. Dumbledore laid Mrs. Norris on the polished surface and began to examine her. Harry, Ron, and Hermione exchanged tense looks and sank into the chairs outside the pool of the candlelight, watching. The tip of Dumbledore's long, crooked nose from Mrs. Norris's fur. He was looking at her closely through his half-moon spectacle glasses, his long fingers gently prodding and poking. Professor McGonagall was bent almost as close, her eyes narrowed. Snape loomed behind him, half in shadow, wearing a most peculiar expression. It was as though he was trying hard not to smile, and Lockhart was hovering around them, making suggestions. It was definitely a curse that killed her, probably transfiguration torture. I've seen it used many times. So unlucky I wasn't there. I know a counter curse that would have saved her. Lockhart's comments were punctuated by Filch's dry, racking sobs. He had slumped in a chair by the desk, unable to look at Mrs. Norris, his face in his hands. Much as he detested Filch, Harry couldn't help feel sorry for him, though not as nearly as sorry as he felt for himself. If Dumbledore believed Filch, he would be expelled for sure. Dumbledore was now muttering strange words under his breath and tapping Mrs. Norris with the wand, but nothing happened. She continued to look as though she had been recently stuffed. I remember something very similar happening in Uwangandongo, said Lockhart. A series of attacks. A small story in my autobiography. I was able to provide the townsfolk with various amulets which cleared up the matter at once. The photographs on Lockhart's wall were all nodding in agreement as he talked. One of them had forgotten to remove his hairnet. At last, Dumbledore straightened up. She's not dead, Argus, he said softly. Lockhart had stopped abruptly in the middle of counting the number of murders he had prevented. Not dead, choked Filch, though looking through his fingers at Mrs. Norris. But why's she all stiff and frozen? She's been petrified, said Dumbledore. Ah, I thought so, said Lockhart. But how can I not say? Ask him, shrieked Filch, turned his bulged and tear-stained face to Harry. No second year could have done this, Dumbledore said firmly. It would take dark magic of the most advanced. He did it, Filch spat, his pouchy face purpling. You saw what he wrote on the wall. He found in my office. He knows I'm a Filch's words worked horribly. He knows I'm a squibbit, he finished. I never touched Mrs. Norris, Harry said loudly, uncomfortably aware of everyone looking at him, including all of Lockhart's on the wall. I don't even know what a snibbit is. Rubbish, snarled Filch. He saw my kill-switch letter. If I might speak, Headmaster, said Snape from the shadow, and Harry's sense of foreboding increased. He was sure nothing Snape had to say was going to be good for him. Potter and his friends may have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he said, a slight sneer of his curling his mouth though he doubted it. But we do have a set of suspicious circumstances here. Why was he in the staircases up in the corridor? Why wasn't he at the Halloween feast? Harry and Hermione all launched into the exploration of the Death Day party. There were hundreds of ghosts. They will tell you they were there. Well, why not join the feast afterwards, said Snape, his eyes black in the gutter. Why did you go up the corridor? Harry and Hermione looked at Harry. Because Harry said, his face thumping. Something told him. It would sound very far-fetched if he told them that he had been led there by a bodiless voice no one could hear. Because we were tired and wanted to go to bed, he said. Oh, Harry. Without any supper, said Snape, a triumphant smile flickering across his face. I didn't think ghosts provided food fit for living humans in their parties. We weren't hungry, Rod said loudly. His stomach gave a huge rumble. Snape's nasty smile widened. I suggest, Headmaster, that Potter is not being entirely truthful, he said. It might be a good idea if he were deprived of certain privileges until he is ready to tell the whole story. I personally feel he should be taken off Gryffindor Quidditch team until he is ready to be honest. Really, Severus, said Professor McGonagall sharply. I see no reason for the boy to stop playing Quidditch. This cat wasn't hit over the head with a broomstick. There is no evidence that Potter did anything wrong. Dumbledore was giving Harry a searching look. His twinkling light blue gaze made Harry feel as though he was being x-rayed. Innocent until proven guilty, Severus, he said firmly. Snape looked furious, so did Filch. My cat has been petrified, he shrieked, his eyes popping. I want something done as punishment. We will be able to cure her, Argus said Dumbledore patiently. Professor Sprout recently managed to procure some mandrakes. As soon as they have reached their full size, I will make a potion that will revive Miss Norris. I will make it, Lockhart butted in. I must have done it hundreds of times. I could whip up mandrake restorative draught in my sleep. Excuse me, said Snape icily. I believe I am the potions master at this school. There was a very awkward pause. You may go, Dumbledore said to Ron, Harry, and Hermione. They went past as quickly as they could without running. When they were a floor up from Lockhart's office, they turned into an empty classroom and closed the door behind them. Harry squinted at his friends' darkened faces. Do you think I should have told them about the voices I heard? No, Rod said without hesitation. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the Wizarding world. Something in Ron's face made Harry ask, You believe me, don't you? Of course I do, said Ron quickly, but you must admit it's weird. I know it's weird, said Harry. The whole thing's weird. What was the writing on that wall about? The chamber has been opened? What's that supposed to mean? You know, it rings a sort of bell, said Ron softly. I think someone told me about a secret chamber at Hogwarts. It must have been Bill. And what on earth's a squib? Said Harry. To his surprise, Ron stifled a snigger. Well, it's not funny really, but as it's Filch, he said, a squib is someone who is born into the wizarding world but hasn't got any magic powers. Kind of the opposite of a muggle-born wizard. But squibs are quite unusual. If Filch is trying to learn magic from the Q-spell course, I reckon he must be a squib. Now, it would explain a lot. Like why he hates students so much. Ron gave a satisfied smile. He's bitter. A clock chimed somewhere. Midnight, said Harry. We'd better get to bed before Snape comes along and tries to frame us for something else. For the few days, the school could talk of little else but the attack on Mrs. Norris. Filch kept it fresh in everyone's mind by pacing to the spot where she had been attacked, as though he thought the attacker might come back. With Mrs. Scour's all-perfect magical remover, but to no effect, the words still gleamed as brightly as ever on the stone. When Filch wasn't guarding the scene of the crime, he was skulking red-eyed through the corridors, lunging out at unsuspecting students and trying to put them in detention for things like breathing loudly and looking happy. Ginny Weasley seemed very disturbed by Mrs. Norris's fate. According to Ron, she was a great cat lover. But you haven't really gotten to know Miss Norris, Ron told her bracingly. Honestly, we're much better off without her. Ginny's lip trembled. Stuff like this doesn't happen at Hogwarts, Rod assured her. They'll catch that maniac who did it and have him out of here in no time. I just hope he has the time to petrify Filch before he's expelled. I'm only joking, Ron added hastily as Ginny blenched. The attack had also had an effect on Hermione. It was quite usual for Hermione to spend a lot of time reading, but she was now doing almost nothing else. Nor could Harry and Ron get much response from her when they asked what she was up to. And not until the following Wednesday did they find out. Harry had been held back in potions, where Snape had made him stay behind to scrape tubworms off a desk. After a hurried lunch, he went upstairs to meet Ron in the library, and saw Justin Finch Filchy, the Hufflepuff from the herbology, coming towards him. He had just opened his mouth to say hello when Justin caught sight of him, turned abruptly, and sped off in the opposite direction. Harry found Ron in the back of the library, measuring his history of magic homework. Professor Binns had asked for a 3-foot-long composition of medieval assembly of European wizards. I don't believe it. I'm still 8 inches short, said Ron furiously, letting go of his parchment, which sprang back into a roll. And Hermione's done 4 feet 7 inches, and her writing's tiny. Where is she? Harry asked, grabbing the tape measure and unscrolling his homework. Somewhere over there, Ron said, pointing along the shelves. Looking for another book. I think she's trying to read the whole library before Christmas. Harry told Ron about Justin Finch Filchy running away from him. Don't know why you care. I thought he was a bit of an idiot, said Ron, scribbling away at his writing as large as possible. All that junk about Lockhart being so great. Hermione emerged from between the bookshelves. She looked irritable and at least seemed ready to talk to them. All the copies of Hogwarts: A History have been taken out, she said, sitting down next to Harry and Ron. And there is no 2-week waiting list. I wish I hadn't left my copy at home. but I couldn't fit it in my trunk with all of Lockhart's books. Why do you want it? Said Harry. The same reason everyone else wants it, said Hermione. To read up on the Chamber of Secrets. What's that? Said Harry quickly. That's just it. I can't remember, said Hermione, biting her lip. And I can't find the story anywhere. Hermione, let me read your compositions, said Ron, desperately checking his watch. No, I won't, said Hermione, suddenly severe. You've had 10 days to finish it. I only need 2 inches, come on. The bell rang. Ron and Hermione led the way to History, Magic, Pickering. History of Magic was the dullest subject on their schedule. Professor Binns, who taught it, was their only ghost teacher, and the most exciting thing that ever happened in his classes was his entering the room through the blackboard. Ancient and shriveled, many people said he hadn't noticed he was dead. He had simply got up to teach one day and left his body behind him in an armchair in front of the staff on the fire. His routine had not varied in the slightest. Today was also as boring as ever. Professor Binns opened his note and began to read in a flat drone like an old vacuum cleaner until it was nearly everyone in class was in a deep snore, occasionally coming in and out enough to copy the name of a date, then falling asleep again. He had been speaking for an hour and a half when something happened that had never happened before. Hermione put up her hand. Professor Binns, glancing in the middle of a deadly dull lecture of the International Warlock Convention in 1942, looked amazed. Mr. Granger, Professor, I was wondering if you could tell any of us about the Chamber of Secrets, said Hermione in a clear voice. Dean Thomas, who had been sitting with his mouth hanging open, gazed out of his window, jerked out of his trance. Lavender Brown's head glanced up off their desk, and Neville Longbottom's elbow slipped off his desk. Professor Binns blinked. My subject is history of magic, he said dryly, Weasley-voiced. I deal with facts, Miss Granger, not myths and legends. He cleared his throat and said in a small voice like chalk snapping, continued. In September of that year, a subcommittee of Sardinian sorcerers, he stuttered to a halt. Hermione's hand was waving in the air again. Miss Grant, please, sir, don't legends always have a basic in fact? Professor Binns was looking at her in amazement. Harry was sure no student had ever interrupted him before, alive or dead. Well, Professor Binns said slowly, yes, one could argue that, I suppose. He peered at Hermione as though he had never seen a student properly before. However, the legend of which you speak is in such a very sensational, even ludicrous tale. But the whole class was now hanging on to Binns' every word. He looked dimly at all of them. Every face turned to his. Harry could tell he was completely thrown by such an unusual show of interest. Oh, very well, he said slowly. Let me see, the Chamber of Secrets. You all know, of course, that Hogwarts was founded over 1,000 years ago. The precise date is uncertain, by 4 of the greatest wizards and wizards of the age. The 4 of the houses are named after them: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. They built this castle together, far from the prying Muggle eyes, for it was in the age of when magic was feared by common people, and witches and wizards suffered much persecution. He paused, gazed blearily around the room, and continued. For a few years, the founders worked a harmony together, seeking out youngsters who showed signs of magic and bringing them to the castle to be educated. But then disagreements sprang up between them. A rift began to grow between Slytherin and the others. Slytherin wished to be more selective about the students admitted to Hogwarts. He believed that magical learning should be kept within all magical families. He disliked taking students of Muggle parentage, believing them to be untrustworthy. After a while, there was a serious argument on the subject between Slytherin and Gryffindor, and Slytherin left the school. Professor Binns paused again, pursing his lips, looking like a wrinkled old tortoise. Reliable historical sources tell us as much, he said, but these honest facts have been obscured by the fanciful legend of the Chamber of Secrets. The story goes that Slytherin had built a hidden chamber in the castle. Of course, the other founders knew nothing. Slytherin, according to legend, sealed the Chamber of Secrets so that none would be able to enter it until his own true heir arrived at the school. The heir alone would be able to unseal the Chamber of Secrets, unleash the horror within, and use it to purge the school of all who are unworthy to study magic. There was a silence as he finished telling the story, but it wasn't the usual sleepy silence that filled Professor Binns' classes. There was unease in the air as everyone continued to watch him, hoping for more. Professor Binns looked faintly annoyed. The whole thing is an arrogant nonsense, of course, he said. Naturally, the school has been searched for evidence of such a chamber many a times by the most learned witches and wizards. It does not exist. A tale to frighten the gullible. Hermione's hand went back into the air. Sir, what exactly do you mean by the horror within the chamber? That is believed to be some sort of monster, which was the heir of Slytherin can control, said Professor Binns in his dry, reedy voice. The class exchanged nervous looks. I tell you that a thing does not exist, said Professor Finch, shuffling his note. There is no chamber, no such monster. But sir, said Seamus Finnegan, if the chamber could only be opened by Slytherins true heir, none of us would be able to find it, would they? Nonsense, flattery, said Profens in an aggravated voice. If a succession of Hogwarts headmasters and headmistresses haven't found the thing, but Professor, piped Prativ Patil, you'd probably have to use dark magic to open it. Just because a wizard doesn't use dark magic doesn't mean he can't, Mrs. Pennyfeather. I repeat, if the likes of Dumbledore, but maybe you've got to be related to Slytherin so Dumbledore couldn't, began Damus Dean. The Professor Dean's had enough. That will do, he said sharply. It is a myth. It does not exist. There is not a shred of evidence that Slytherins ever produced such a secret broom cupboard. I'm telling you such a foolish story. In fact, if you please, to history, to solid, believable, verifiable fact. And within minutes, the class had sunk back into its usual stupor. I always knew Salazar Slytherin was a twisted loony, Ron told Harry and Hermione as they fought their way through the teeming corridors at the end of the lesson to drop their bags off before dinner. But I never knew he started all this pureblood stuff. I wouldn't be in his house if he paid me. Honestly, if the Sorting Hat had tried to put me in Slytherin, I would have this straight back home. Hermione nodded fervently, but Harry hadn't said anything. His stomach had dropped unpleasantly. Harry had never told Ron and Hermione that the Slytherin Hat had seriously considered putting him in Slytherin. He could remember it as if it was though yesterday, the small voice that had spoken in his ear when he'd placed the hat on his head a year before. You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. The Slytherin would help you on their way to greatness. No doubt about that. But Harry, who had already heard of Slytherin's house reputation for turning out dark wizards, had thought desperately, not Slytherin. And the hat had said, oh well, if you're for sure, better for Gryffindor. As they shunted along the throng, Colin Creevey went past. Hiya, Harry. Hello, Colin, said Harry automatically. Harry, a boy in my class has been saying you're... But Colin was so small, he couldn't fight past the tide of people bearing towards him in the Great Hall. They heard him squeak, see ya, Harry, and he was gone. What's a boy in his class saying about you? Hermione wondered. Well, that I'm Slytherin heir, I suspect, said Harry, his stomach dropping another inch or so as he suddenly remembered the way Justin Filch Ridley had ran away from him at lunchtime. People here will believe anything, said Ron in disgust. The crowd thinned as they were able to climb the next stairs without difficulty. Do you really think that there's a chamber of secrets? Ron said to Hermione. I don't know, she said frowningly. Dumbledore cured and cure Miss Norris, and that makes me think that whatever attacked her might not be, well, human. As he spoke, they turned a corner and found themselves at the end of the very corridor where the attack happened. They stopped and looked. The scene that was just as if it had been that night. Except there was no stiff hanging cap from the torch bracket, and the empty socket stood in against the wall, bearing the message. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. That's where Filch has been keeping guard, Ron muttered. They looked at each other. The corridor was deserted. Can't hurt to poke around, said Harry, dropping his bag and getting on his hands and knees so that he could crawl around looking for clues. Scorch marks, he said, here and here. Come here and look at this, said Hermione. This funny... Harry got up and crossed the window next to the message on the wall. Hermione was pointing to the topmost pane. There were around 20 spiders there, scuttling, apparently fighting to get through a small crack. A long silvery thread was dangling like a rope, as though they had all climbed in a hurry to get inside. Have you seen spiders act like that? Said Hermione wonderingly. No, said Harry. Have you, Ron? Ron? He looked over his shoulder, and Ron was stumbling well back and seemed to be fighting the impulse to run. What's up? Said Harry. I don't like spiders, said Ron tensely. I never knew that, said Hermione, looking at Ron with surprise. You've used spiders in potions loads of times. I don't mind them dead, said Ron, who was carefully looking anywhere but the window. I just don't like the way they move. Hermione giggled. It's not funny, said Ron fiercely. If you must know, when I was 3, Fred turned my teddy bear into a great filthy spider because I broke his toy broomstick. You wouldn't like them either if you had been holding a bear and suddenly it had too many legs and... He broke off shuddering. Hermione was obviously trying not to laugh, feeling they'd better get off the subject. Harry said, remember all the water on the floor? Where did that come from? Someone's mopped it up. It was about here, said Ron, recovering himself to walk a few paces past Filch's chair and pointing, level with this door. He reached for the brass doorknob, but suddenly withdrew his hand as if he had been burned. What's the matter? He said. Can't go in there, Ron said gruffly. That's the Gore's toilet. Oh, Ron, there won't be anyone in there, said Hermione, standing up and pacing over. That's Moaning Myrtle's place. Come on, let's have a look. And ignoring the large out-of-order sign, she opened the door. It was the gloomiest, most depressing-looking bathroom Harry had ever stepped foot in. Under a large, cracked, and spotted mirror, there were a row of chipped sinks. The floor was cramped and damp. I reflected the dull light given off by the stubs of a few candles, burning in their low holders. The wooden doors in the stalls were flaking and scratched, one of them dangling off its hinges. Hermione put her fingers to her lips and started off towards the end of the stall. When she reached it, she said, "Hello, Myrtle, how are you?" Ron and Hermione went to look. Moaning Myrtle was flirting above the tank of the toilet, picking at a spot on her chain. "This is the girls' bathroom," she said, eyeing Ron and Hermione suspiciously. "They're not girls." "No," Hermione agreed. "I just wanted to show them how, nice it was in here." She waved vaguely at the dirty mirror in the damp floor. "Ask her if she saw anything," Harry mouthed at Hermione. "What are you whispering?" said Myrtle, staring at him. "Nothing," said Harry quickly. "We wanted to ask—" "I wish people would stop talking behind my back," said Myrtle in a choked voice. "I do have feelings, you know, even if I'm dead." "Myrtle, no one wants to upset you," said Hermione. Harry only— "No one wants to upset me? That's a good one," howled Myrtle. "My life is nothing but misery at this place, and now people come along ruining my death." "We wanted to ask you if you've seen anything funny lately," said Hermione, "because a cat was attacked right outside your door on Halloween night." "Did you see anyone here that night?" said Harry. "I wasn't paying attention," said Myrtle dramatically. "Peeves upset me so much I came in here and tried to kill myself. Then of course I remember that I'm already dead," said Ron helpfully. Myrtle gave a tragic sob, rose up in the air, turned over, and dived headfirst in the toilet, splashing water all over them and vanishing from sight. Although from the direction of her muffled sobs, she had come to rest somewhere in the U-bin. Harry and Ron stood with their mouths open, but Hermione shrugged wearily and said, Honestly, that was almost cheerful for Myrtle. Come on, let's go." Harry and Ron barely closed the door on Myrtle's gurgling sobs when a loud voice made the three of them jump. "Ron!" Percy Weasley had stopped dead on the stairs ahead of him. Prefect Badge gleamed, an expression of complete shock on his face. "That's the girls' bathroom," he gasped. "What were you—" "Just having a look around," Ron shrugged. "Clues, you know." Percy swelled in a manner that reminded Harry forcefully of Mrs. Weasley. "Get away from there," Percy said, striding toward them and starting to bustle them along, flapping his arms. "Don't you care what this looks like? Coming back from here with everyone's at dinner." "Why shouldn't we be here?" said Ron hotly, stopping short and glaring at Percy. "Listen, we never laid a finger on that cat." "That's what I told Ginny," said Percy fiercely, "but she still thinks you're going to be expelled. I've never seen her so upset, crying her eyes out. You might think of her. All the first years are thoroughly overexcited by this business." "You don't care about Ginny," said Ron. "You're just worried I'm going to mess up your chances of being head boy." 5 points from Gryffindor, Percy said tensely, fingering his prefect badge. "And I hope it teaches you a lesson. No more detective work, or I'll write to Mum." He strode off, the back of his neck as red as Ron's ears. Harry, Ron, and Hermione chose seats as far away from Percy in the common room that night. Ron was still very bad-tempered and kept blotting his charms homework. He had reached absolutely for his wad to remove the smudges. It ignited the parchment. Fuming almost as much as his homework, Ron slammed the slandered spells of books Gary 2 shut. To Harry's surprise, Hermione followed suit. "Who could it be, though?" she said in a quiet, as though continuing conversation as they had been having. "Who'd want to frighten all the squibs and muggleborns out of Hogwarts?" "Let's think," said Ron in a mock puzzlement. "Who do we know that thinks muggles-born are scum?" He looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back unconvinced. "If you're talking about Malfoy—" "Of course I am," said Ron. "You heard him. You'll be next, mudbloods. Come on, you only have to look for the foul rat's face to know it's him." "Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin?" Hermione said skeptically. "Look at his family," said Harry, closing his books. "The whole lot of them have been in Slytherin. He's always boasting about it. They could easily be Slytherin descendants. His father's definitely evil enough. They could have had the key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries," said Ron, handing it down father to son. "Oh," said Hermione cautiously. "I suppose it's possible. But how do you prove it?" said Harry darkly. "There might be a way," said Hermione, dropping her voice still further with a quick glance across the room to Percy. "Of course, it would be difficult and dangerous, very dangerous. We'd be breaking about 50 school rules, I suspect. If in a month or so you feel like explaining, you will let us know, won't you?" said Ron irritably. "All right," said Hermione coldly. "What we need to do is get inside Slytherin's car room and ask Malfoy a few questions without him realizing it's us." "That's impossible," Harry said as Ron laughed. "No, it's not," said Hermione. "All we need is some polyjuice potion." "What's that?" said Ron and Harry together. "Snape mentioned it in class a few weeks ago." "Do you think we've got nothing better to do in potions than to listen to Snape?" Ron muttered. "It transforms you into someone else. Think about it. We could change into 3 of the Slytherins. None of us would know it was us. Malfoy would probably tell us anything. He'd probably boasted about it in the Slytherin Carmage room right now. If only we could hear him." This polyjuice potion stuff sounds a bit dodgy to me, said Ron, frowning. What if we were stuck looking like Slytherins forever? It wears off after a while, said Hermione, waving her hand impatiently, but getting a hold of the recipe will be absolutely difficult. Snape said it is in a book called Montes et Pontes et Potions, and it's bound to be in the restricted section of the library. There was only one way to get a book from the restricted section. You needed a signed note permission from a teacher. Hard to see why we want the book, really, said Ron, if we weren't going to try to make the use potions. I think, said Hermione, that if we made it sound as though we were interested in the theory, we might stand a chance. Oh, come on, no teacher's going to fall for that, said Ron. They'd have to be really thick. Oh, wow. I wonder where this is going to go. But I guess we'll see on the next adventure. What do you think, Northstar? I like that part too. We'll see you on the next adventure, okay? And we'll see you on the next adventure here with Wayne Reads. Thanks for joining us, and can't wait to see you on the next adventure. Bye-bye.